The room was the definition of Japanese political formality. High-backed leather chairs, dark wood, and a hushed silence broken only by the nervous rustle of briefing papers. On one side sat Prime Minister Takeiichi, leader of the Liberal Democratic Party, the perpetual establishment power. On the other, the man who held her political life in his hands. The leader of the Japan Innovation Party, Ishin no Kai. Ishin had demanded one thing, a must-pass prerequisite to keep the governing coalition alive. An absurd bill to slash diet seats, a move so radical even the former iron-fisted LDP leader Shinzo Abe had never dared to propose it. The bill was aggressive, a bypass of all traditional procedure, effectively holding the Diet's political stability hostage to a single chaotic act of reform. And Takeiichi, faced with the alternative of her entire administration collapsing, she capitulated. She had agreed to rush the bill, to endure the internal screaming from her own LDP veterans who saw this move as an insult to their long-held political decorum. But then the predictable happened. The other opposition parties, realizing this entire maneuver was designed to consolidate the LDP-Ishin power, banded together and killed the bill before it could even be debated. So here they were, the Prime Minister who had been strong-armed and the opposition leader who had made the must-pass threat. The bill had collapsed. The coalition should have too. Yet, as the two leaders met, you could see on their faces not the tension of a flash divorce, but the unmistakable, quiet satisfaction of a truce. The truth was, Ishin had gotten what it wanted all along, having tasted the sweet nectar of governing power. The failed bill was just a performance for the crowd. The real precious victory was simply being allowed to stay at the table. Okay, let's unpack this. It's a huge political saga. Our mission today is to really understand the fundamental and deeply cynical nature of this LDP-Ishin coalition and what came out of it, this truce. We need to know what Takeiichi and the LDP sacrificed to get this deal and, on the other side, what this whole thing ultimately cost Ishin in terms of their identity and credibility. Most importantly, we're asking how this incident permanently changes the rule book for Japanese politics. This is just a spectacular show of leverage, and the implications, they ripple far beyond one failed bill.
And if you connect this to the bigger picture, this entire high-stakes drama it's the direct result of a tectonic shift in Japanese politics. I'm talking about the abrupt end of the 26-year LDP Komado formula.
26 years. That's a political lifetime.
It is. For more than 2 decades, the LDP could rely on Komado for stable, predictable support. That allowed for smooth legislative passage, a high degree of confidence. But with Komado's sudden departure, the LDP was forced into this inherently unstable, almost desperate search for votes. So Prime Minister Takeiichi's administration, by its very nature, is fragile and utterly dependent on the whims, the demands, and, frankly, the political posturing of the Japan Innovation Party, Ishin no Kai. The cost of that dependence, the ransom they have to pay, that's exactly what we are seeing play out in real time.
Okay, so let's start with the immediate context of Takeiichi's rise, because her path was anything but smooth, right? And it seems like it really set the stage for her vulnerability. He's an ultra-conservative, a distinct China hawk, and she became the first female PM after a really contentious LDP race.
A very contentious race. She beat out rivals like Koizumi Shinjiro. That alone is a historical landmark, of course. But the moment she secured that leadership, her political math got incredibly complicated.
And that complication was the Komado withdrawal?
That was it. And this wasn't just, a simple policy disagreement. It was the dissolution of one of modern Japan's most reliable political engines. It ended a 26-year alliance. And to get the gravity of that, you really have to understand Komado, often called the Peace Party. They're the political arm of the Soka Gakkai,
which is Japan's largest lay Buddhist organization. So their support isn't just about policy. It's this massive, highly disciplined organizational structure.
Precisely. The Soka Gakkai provides what's known as a block vote. Their members are highly motivated, they turn out, and crucially, they follow voting instructions. They'll often switch their vote to support LDP candidates in specific single-member districts just to ensure the coalition's overall victory.
And their identity has always been built on
pacifism, anti-militarism, strong social welfare programs, and critically clean government.
So why did they finally walk away after 26 years? What was the breaking point?
Well, their core supporters grew increasingly frustrated on a couple of fronts. First, there was policy drift. Over the last decade, and especially under preceding LDP leadership, Komado had to kind of reluctantly support increased defense spending and a much more muscular security posture.
Which goes directly against their pacifist principles.
Correctly. It caused significant internal dissent. And second, there was scandal fatigue. The LDP has just been plagued by these persistent money in politics scandals, cash for favors, undeclared fundraising, which severely eroded Komado's appeal to floating voters.
The ones who were attracted to their clean image in the first place.
Exactly. It became too difficult for Komado to maintain its brand while standing right next to the scandal-plagued LDP. The internal pressure just became unsustainable.
That's a powerful breakdown. So Komado's support was crucial, but their core identity was just. It became fundamentally incompatible with where the LDP was heading, especially on security and transparency. So once they pulled the plug, Takeiichi immediately faced a serious power vacuum.
The huge one. She might be the leader of the perpetual ruling party, but without Komado's bloc vote and their seats, the LDP simply did not have the numbers to guarantee stability.
So let's look at the actual numbers, the arithmetic of dependence in the 465-member House of Representatives.
Right, the lower house. The LDP alone holds 196 seats. They need a minimum of 233 for an absolute majority. That is a massive shortfall of 37 seats.
37. So Takeiichi had to find a partner, and fast.
And that partner was Ishin, the Japan Innovation Party. With their 35 seats, the combined total comes to 231 seats.
Wait, that is still 2 seats short of the majority threshold? The margin of error is basically 0.
It creates an almost existential dependency. And the shortfall is why the alliance is characterized as a confidence and supply arrangement. It's a vital difference.
Okay, break that down. What's the difference between that and a formal coalition?
In a formal coalition, the junior partner gets cabinet seats, shares in the day-to-day responsibility of governing. But in a confidence and supply arrangement, Ishin agrees only to vote with the LDP on the crucial votes, specifically no confidence motions and the budget, just to keep the government afloat.
But they're not in the cabinet.
Exactly. They're essentially external, sometimes hostile allies.
And because they're 2 seats shy, even with Ishin, the LDP-Ishin bloc needs a third party to pass regular legislation. They can't just rely on their 231.
Precisely. To pass day-to-day bills, they still have to go out and negotiate with other parties, like the Democratic Party for the People, the DPP, which has 27 seats, and they have to do it on a bill-by-bill basis.
Which sounds incredibly slow and unpredictable.
It is. The stability that the LDP-Komado relationship provided for decades, it just vanished overnight. It's been replaced by this precarious seat-by-seat negotiation.
And that inherent instability is Ishin's entire source of leverage. They knew they were the critical, irreplaceable factor, so they didn't just come asking for minor policy tweaks.
No, they came to the table with a shotgun list of demands, an unusually high set of expectations across 12 distinct policy areas.
And what's fascinating is their priority. They chose to maximize policy gains rather than grab cabinet slots.
A very clear operational priority. By staying outside the cabinet, they get to retain their image as an outsider, as a reformist party, while still driving the national agenda. It's crucial for their anti-establishment brand. Their demands included sweeping changes, constitutional reforms, strengthening national security, specific energy policies favoring nuclear power, and some very hardline positions on foreigners in Japan.
And among those 12 points, 3 were declared non-negotiable. These were the litmus tests for Takeiichi.
Yes. Those 3 were the second capital initiative, lowering social insurance fees, and of course the big one, the diet seat reduction bill, the Taisu Sakugan Hijin. The overall alignment between the 2 conservative parties is strong, but Ishin's demands for these specific radical administrative reforms, that's the price for their votes. The first test was always going to be the budget and this extraordinary diet session, and this is where Ishin decided to deploy their most aggressive tactic. Okay, so let's dig deep into this particular demand. Ishin didn't just list the diet seat reduction bill as a goal. They designated it a non-negotiable condition and a must-pass prerequisite for the survival of the alliance. I mean, this wasn't consultation, this was political coercion.
And they were incredibly explicit about the threat. They were leveraging their critical position as the swing vote. The Ishin Secretary General, Nakatsuka, he made it public. He said, quote, "If it is not done in this diet session, we will withdraw from the coalition at any time."
This represents a profound shift in Japanese political culture. Unlike the quiet, consultative methods of the LDP-Komado era, Ishin employed a strategy of raw coercion. As an anti-establishment force, they were trying to force their core agenda-cutting politicians onto the national stage, using the LDP's desperation as a lever.
It was an aggressive transactional move that a lot of veteran political observers called absurd, not just for what was in it, but the procedure. It demanded this huge institutional change without any of the typical multi-party consultation.
Right, and we should note, this is something even former Prime Minister Abe with all his power, avoid it.
Why? Why is it so politically radioactive to mess with the Diet's composition?
Because it creates unnecessary enemies. The smaller parties feel targeted, and it stirs up resentment within your own party's rank and file, who are suddenly afraid of losing their own seats. And if we look closely at the content of this proposal, you can see it was designed as an electoral weapon.
Okay, lay out the mechanics for us. What exactly did the bill propose?
The bill targeted a 10% reduction in lower house seats, dropping the total from 465 to around 415. But the crucial detail, the real poison pill, is where they wanted to make the cuts. The plan was to do it almost entirely by slashing proportional representation, or PR seats, specifically cutting 50 of them.
Okay, just to clarify for everyone listening, Japan's Diet uses a mixed system. You have single-member districts, SMDs, winner-take-all, and then you have proportional representation, PR, blocks where seats are allocated based on a party's national vote share. So why does targeting the PR seats make this bill so cynical?
Targeting PR seats is the key to the whole political calculus. PR seats are the lifeblood of smaller parties. They allow parties that don't have concentrated regional support, like Komado, the Japanese Communist Party, emerging microparties, to still get a national voice that reflects their popular vote.
So if you cut PR seats,
you are fundamentally undercutting the ability of minority voices to exist in the Diet. You're trying to force a return to a purely two-party system that massively favors the LDP's regional dominance.
And we have estimates based on the 2024 election results that show just how devastating this would be. It makes it look like a clear electoral attack.
The numbers speak for themselves. The LDP, which dominates the SMD system, would only lose 17 seats, a 9% overall decline. Ishin itself would lose 5 seats, about a 13% decline. But the strategic pain was designed for their rivals.
Right.
Komado and the JCP would see a sharp 25% decline in their overall seats because they rely so heavily on the PR segment. And the smallest parties, like Sanseido or the Conservative Party, would face catastrophic losses, potentially a 67% decline.
So this wasn't really about administrative reform or saving taxpayer money. This was a direct shot at Komado, their mortal rival in the Kansai region, who relies on that PR segment to secure a national presence.
It was pure political strategy dressed up as reformist zeal. And, predictably, it faced fierce resistance. Komado openly called the proposal electoral harassment. They saw it as a declaration of war. Even a lot of LDP members, recognizing the violation of decorum, demanded careful deliberation, not a rush vote.
So the LDP leadership under Takeiichi, they could only agree to aim for passage. But the LDP veterans quickly signaled that just submitting the bill might be the most they could do without blowing up the government.
Exactly. And ultimately, the bill collapsed. It never even entered formal debate, killed by a coalition of other opposition parties. Yet the expected flash divorce became this immediate, deeply cynical truce.
So why this sudden calm?
The reason is encapsulated in that wonderful Japanese political phrase, yotu no mitsu no aji, the sweet nectar of power. My analysis suggests that Ishin's real victory was simply being allowed to stay in the governing fold, having tasted that nectar. The high-stakes demand and the withdrawal threat, that was just stanum purai, political posturing for their reform-minded base.
What are the tangible benefits of that sweet nectar that made it worth abandoning their must-pass demand?
Oh, being part of the ruling bloc provides immense, subtle power that far outweighs one bill. It means access to privileged information, staffing support, budgetary insights, and crucially, the ability to subtly influence cabinet ministries through consultation, even without a ministerial portfolio.
So they get the performance for their base, but they also get real operational influence.
Exactly. The moment the bill collapsed, they didn't follow through, because giving up that proximity to power for a procedural failure would have been illogical for a party trying to go from regional firebrand to national player. The truce saved face for Takeiichi and allowed Ishin to quietly enjoy the proximity to power they had fought so hard to secure.
The political concession Takeiichi made, though, even with the bill failing, it must have cost the LDP dearly in terms of authority and
For a veteran like that, the LDP's dependence signals a dangerous, even humiliating precedent. PM Takeiichi's initial agreement to rush that must-pass bill exposed her vulnerability immediately. She essentially stated, publicly and internally, that Ishin's 35 votes were a higher priority than her own authority and, more damagingly, than the LDP's long-held political decorum.
Right. The LDP is used to setting the agenda, controlling the pace, and suddenly they were seen as being bullied or strong-armed by a smaller populist party. That's a huge psychological shift that has to create friction.
It breeds immediate, palpable resentment among the long-serving members.
Yeah.
You have to remember how LDP veterans view the system. It's structured, it's hierarchical, it's based on deep prospective process. The idea of yielding to coercive demands that insult those traditions, especially from an outsider like Ishin, is deeply insulting.
It creates a narrative among the old guard that the LDP is paying for our strength with weakness.
That's it exactly. And this vulnerability immediately encourages internal rivals to challenge Takeiichi's leadership. The LDP structure relies so heavily on internal factions, the Habatsu, which are always competing for influence, for policy direction, for those lucrative cabinet portfolios.
And factions are managed through loyalty to the leader. But if Takeiichi shows herself to be weak or easily manipulated by an external party, what message does that send to those factions?
It suggests she lacks the command to govern smoothly. If the party is constantly forced to bow to external threats, the internal factions will feel less compelled to offer their loyalty. Why follow a leader who can't secure the party's agenda without these humiliating concessions?
And if Ishin successfully held the government hostage, every other small party or even internal factions might try the same thing, right? It just constantly undermines her ability to focus on national policy.
She's fighting a very difficult two-front war. She has to manage the volatile Ishin alliance externally, keeping them just happy enough, while simultaneously managing her own resentful party internally. We should note, though, the partnership isn't all negative for her survival.
It's a profound double-edged sword. On one hand, the policy alignment with Ishin satisfies the LDP's conservative base.
Absolutely. Takeiichi and Ishin share a right-leaning agenda, constitutional reform, stronger defense, a Japan-first ideology, and Takeiichi herself started her premiership with high cabinet approval, which signaled strong support from the conservative wing who appreciate her tough stance. She solidified her base by choosing Ishin over the more moderate Komado.
But personal popularity doesn't always translate to lasting party strength, especially if that strength is built on shifting sand.
And that's the core vulnerability. While her personal cabinet approval ratings were quite high, support for the LDP itself remains lower than when her predecessor was in office. The instability caused by Ishin's constantly demanding posture risks alienating those moderate independent voters who prefer a predictable, stable government.
So if the LDP is seen as constantly fighting for its survival with a populist force, that perception of instability could be really damaging.
It could erode the LDP's foundational support, regardless of how much the conservative base loves the policy alignment. Her position being highly popular personally, but presiding over this volatile and internally strained coalition, is going to make managing those LDP factions incredibly difficult. The bill's failure was a temporary relief, but the concession itself opened a deep wound in LDP cohesion.
So now let's turn the lens onto Ishin no Kai. They executed a classic play. Win the battle by forcing the concession, then win the truce by accepting the sweet nectar of power. But the crucial question is, what does this pragmatism cost their core identity? Let's think about this from the perspective of a young voter in Osaka, someone drawn to Ishin's firebrand, anti-establishment image, someone who really expected them to blow up the system.
That is the immense long-term electoral gamble Ishin is making. Their entire political DNA was engineered as this reformist, decentralization-oriented regional party based in Kansai. They positioned themselves as the ultimate challengers to the entrenched political establishment in Tokyo.
Their whole brand was built on self-sacrificing reforms, like cutting local assembly seats in Osaka. They were the radical outsiders.
They were. They gained national attention precisely because they were seen as incorruptible and uncompromising. But the moment they quietly settled back into the governing fold after their dramatic must-pass bill collapsed, they risked undermining that revolutionary appeal. They risked becoming exactly what their movement was founded to dismantle, comfortable insiders who prioritize power over reform.
The price of pragmatism here is a serious loss of credibility with that core base. The people who were drawn to the idea of radical change now see the party leadership, after threatening to tear everything apart, just settle for the status quo and a quiet seat at the table.
The disillusionment is profound. For those reform-minded, often younger, volatile voters, Ishin is now seen as just another LDP, a party that swallowed their principles whole for that yotu no mitsu no aji. This shift from firebrand outsider to comfortable insider is their biggest long-term cost. It jeopardizes their electoral viability with the very voters who put them on the map.
And Ishin can't stay a regional party forever. They have to expand nationally to truly challenge the LDP. But how do you do that when you're viewed as the junior partner to a party tainted by fundraising scandals?
It presents a fundamental paradox for their growth strategy. Aligning too closely with the LDP erodes their populist appeal in regions outside of Kansai where they need to gain ground. Moreover, their voter base is structurally so different from Komado, which makes relying on them electorally very risky for the LDP.
Okay, break down that difference in voting structure.
Komado supporters, the Soka Gakkai faithful, are known for their remarkable discipline. They are a reliable, predictable electoral engine. Ishin's voters, however, are far more volatile. They're driven by a fleeting frustration with the establishment. This makes large-scale strategic election cooperation incredibly difficult to rely on.
So you can't just assume Ishin voters will obediently switch their votes to LDP candidates?
Not at all. And the challenge of electoral coordination is massive, especially in the single-member districts. We know the LDP and Ishin were direct competitors in 155 to 164 SMDs in the 2024 election.
That is a staggering amount of local competition they now have to overcome.
To cooperate, they'd have to ask established local rivals, LDP incumbents, or rising Ishin stars, to step aside for the national alliance. Given the intensity of local rivalries, that coordination is a political minefield.
And this is all happening while the LDP has lost that critical Komado bloc vote.
Exactly. Komado was instrumental in securing nearly 20% of the LDP's SMD seats in 2024. Ishin's volatile support base cannot easily fill that vacuum. So unless the LDP and Ishin pull off a logistical nightmare of coordination, projections suggest the LDP could lose up to 20% of its lower house seats in a snap election. Ishin, by choosing the immediate gratification of influence, has complicated its own path to becoming a true national alternative.
So if the LDP's internal dynamics are suffering and Ishin's external appeal is eroding, the third major casualty of this whole saga has to be the breakdown of parliamentary norms and decorum. Let's think about this from the view of a veteran Diet administrator, someone who has witnessed decades of parliamentary management and remembers the sort of sacred rules of consensus.
For someone like that, traditional Diet management operated on a system of good faith and unspoken rules, a culture often compared to akebana, the delicate art of flower arrangement. This meant consultation, mutual respect, and consensus building were the norm, even between rivals.
Right, a culture that assumes everyone respects the procedural rules of the game and prioritizes stable government over a short-term whim.
It's a culture of courtesy. Ishin's tactic, however, was anything but delicate. Their move threatening to veto the entire budget or destabilize the Diet over a single non-essential reform bill was seen by administrators as crude, purely transactional, and a flagrant violation of those norms. It was a sledgehammer in a world accustomed to subtle negotiation.
And the fact that Takeiichi capitulated, even if the bill was ultimately killed, that's the key issue here. By agreeing to rush the bill under duress, what lesson did the LDP effectively teach every other small party in the Diet?
The lesson is clear and dangerous. Confrontation and explicit threats are now seen as more effective than quiet, traditional consultation. Why spend months negotiating when you can just hold the government hostage? The failure of the bill doesn't matter as much as the precedent of the LDP agreeing to the terms of the coercion.
So you're setting a dangerous new precedent. The era of quiet, stable consensus is potentially being replaced by an unpredictable, high-stakes game of political chicken.
The stability risks are immense. It means any legislative item could become a trigger for a government collapse, because smaller parties now know the LDP is willing to yield. Furthermore, the LDP-Ishin arrangement needs a swift, formalized consultation process, something the LDP-Komado structure developed organically over decades.
Without that clear communication and shared understanding of boundaries, the LDP faces a constant two-fronted battle.
That's absolutely right. They have to constantly negotiate with Ishin to keep their votes, and then once that's done, they have to negotiate again with other opposition parties like the DPP to actually pass legislation, since they still lack a majority.
This complex process sounds like a recipe for delay and legislative inertia.
It fundamentally slows the whole system down. Legislative progress will be harder, policy implementation more sluggish. Future coalition agreements might have to move away from the good faith model and rely instead on explicit guarantees, maybe punitive clauses contracts, not handshakes. It's a sure sign that the underlying political stability in Japan has been profoundly weakened.
Okay, let's summarize the cynical exchange at the heart of this deep dive. The LDP, in its desperation after Komado left, bought immediate stability by yielding to Ishin's outrageous must-pass demand. But the predictable failure of that bill exposed the weakness of that victory for both sides, weakening Takeiichi internally and exposing Ishin as a pragmatist externally.
And the longevity of the Takeiichi administration hinges entirely on maintaining this extremely fragile LDP-Ishin partnership.
Yeah.
The collapse of the seat reduction bill was ultimately less about reform and far more about the LDP paying a high symbolic price, damaging its own stability and norms, just to survive the diet session. The LDP has proven it will do whatever it takes, even swapping out a stable partnership for a volatile, coercive force just to stay in power.
The question is no longer if the partnership will hold, but rather how many more essential political norms the LDP will shatter to ensure its continuation.